A thought from the Gospel of Luke chapter 1 this evening. I'll start another series in our midweek services, but it won't be until the calendar turns. If the calendar turns. In the Gospel of Luke chapter number 1, there in verses 18 through 20, we read these verses. And Zacharias said unto the angel, Whereby shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is well stricken in years. And the angel answering said unto him, I am Gabriel, that stand in the presence of God, and am sent to speak unto thee, and to show thee these glad tidings. And behold, thou shalt be dumb, and not able to speak until the day that these things shall be performed, because thou believest not my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season. Sometimes we find it hard to believe the promises of God. Sometimes they are just, it seems, too good to be true. We live in a very cynical age. It's kind of rubbed off on me a little bit, but we live in a cynical age. We're always waiting for the next shoe to drop. Because sometimes when something seems too good to be true, odds are it usually is. Except when it comes to God. In God and in His promises, if it seems too good to be true, it's still true. Because our God is the same and He never changes. But we think that if we only had a supernatural experience with God, like Moses did in the desert with the burning bush, that the bush burned, but it wasn't consumed by the fire. How God spoke to Moses. It's a supernatural event. Or like the 3 Hebrew children that were in the burning fiery furnace in Daniel chapter 3, where the 4th man came in to rescue them out of the burning fiery furnace. A supernatural event. No doubt of it. Or even the Apostle Peter walking on the water in the midst of the storm on the Sea of Galilee. Sometimes we think that if we can only experience such a supernatural event in our life that we would believe. When the reality is, we'd be skeptical. You see, the truth is that our hearts are like the hymn writer wrote in the great hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. He wrote there that our hearts are prone to wander. And we are prone to wander. Sometimes wander away from God. The issue isn't here a lack of God's faithfulness, because God is faithful. He's always faithful. He will always be faithful. He's always been faithful. It's no question of God's faithfulness. The question is our lack of belief. Here in Luke chapter 1, we are introduced to Zacharias and his wife Elizabeth. And they were both believing, faithful servants of the Lord. Zacharias and his wife were of the tribe of Levi. And as a Levite, Zechariah had a portion of the year that he had a place to minister in the temple. They went in shifts, usually of certain weeks or months, that they would serve in the temple, and then someone else would come and serve the next period, so that they'd have time to spend at home. And this was Zacharias' time to be there in the temple, and his responsibility was to take care of the altar of incense and to help lead the people in the evening prayer time. This was his responsibility, and he was faithfully doing that work when he was there in the temple. Zacharias and Elizabeth had prayed to God for a son or a child for many years, and now Zacharias and Elizabeth were past the age of childbearing. They were very similar to Abraham and Sarah when God intervened miraculously and gave them Isaac, the promised son. And we see that God would answer their request for a child, for a son, in a miraculous way. So God sent his messenger angel Gabriel. You notice also in the account in Luke chapter 2 that Gabriel talked with Mary. You'll also notice back in Matthew chapter 1 that it was Gabriel that talked with Joseph and gave the message of God. Because as we read here in our text, Gabriel stood in the presence of God. God said, Gabriel, I want you to go to Zacharias. I want you to tell him. So the message that Gabriel gave to Zacharias came directly from the mouth of God, which makes it true, of no doubt. And he shared this great news with Zacharias. He shared with him there of in verse 13 there, go back to verse 13 there in Luke chapter 1. But the angel said unto him after he appeared unto Zacharias, he said, Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John. And thou shalt have joy and gladness, and many shall rejoice at his birth. For he shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and he shall be filled with the Holy Ghost, even from his mother's womb. And many of the children of Israel shall he turn to the Lord their God. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, or Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. For Zacharias, this should have been great news. Fantastic news. That after all of these years, even in their old age, God was going to give them a son. And they were to name him John, John the Baptist as we know him. And Zacharias should have been thrilled by this news. He should have been rejoicing and praising God, giving God thanks for his answer to their prayers. But Zacharias and Elizabeth had been waiting for a very long time, and probably had prayed this prayer for a very long time. And discouragement can set in. As those of you know who have prayed for loved ones to get saved, or prayed for the Lord to be able to work in someone's life for a very long time, discouragement can set in. Some days you go to pray for that person and you ask God, why, God, haven't you done anything yet? That's natural. Sometimes you get angry and frustrated with God. That's also natural. But instead of being thrilled and rejoicing and praising and giving God thanks for this great news, and for God answering their prayers. Zacharias didn't have confidence in the message that he had heard from the angel, even though it was personally delivered by the angel of God and came directly from God's mouth, if you will. And in verse 18, that's why Zacharias asked the question of the angel that he did. It wasn't from faith that he asked that question. Whereby shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is well stricken in years. That's not a statement of faith. That's a statement of doubt. Because doubt had crept in. Unbelief had crept in. Because they had been praying for this for a long time, and nothing had been done until that time. So in verse 19, the angel set Zacharias straight. You know, I came directly from God. He gave me this message directly to give to you. And I was sent to speak unto thee and to show thee these great tidings. Now, because of Zacharias' doubt and his unbelief, verse 20 says, and behold, thou shalt be dumb and not able to speak until the day that these things shall be performed, because thou believest not my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season. Zacharias didn't believe the message of the angel. Because of that, he was very quiet for a period of about 9 months or so. He couldn't speak. Even as he went out, in the verses that follow, even as he went out to go lead the evening prayer, he couldn't speak to the people. Even when the child was born, and even when John was born, he was 8 days old, and he was brought to the temple to be able to be circumcised, as all the young boys were back at that time. And they were named at that time as well. They were going to name him Zacharias after his dad, Zacharias Jr. But Elizabeth said, no, his name is John. It's going to be John. And then they asked Zacharias, there are no Johns in our family. It had never been a John in our family. Why are you going to do that? Never been a Trevor in your family. There have been Charleses and Georges and Edwards, but there has not been, and I have uncles that were named George, Charles, and Edward. There's never been a Trevor in the family. Why are you going to do that? And then they made signs to Zacharias, and Zacharias asked for something to write upon, and he wrote, his name is John. That is when he was able to speak again. He didn't believe the message of the angel. He didn't believe the word that God had given him. And how many times do we do that in our life? God has given us these exceeding great and precious promises in his word. And we don't believe them. We're cynical about them. No, that can't be right. If I do this, you'll do this, God? That can't be right. Or whatever the promise is that God has given us in his word. They're all ours as believers, adult children adopted into the family of God. We can claim those promises now. But we don't. We hesitate. And the reason why we hesitate is because we doubt. It's unbelief. It's fear. And of course, Zacharias was afraid. An angel showed up at his work. He was afraid, he was a little afraid. It shocked him. Even people in the Bible who had supernatural experiences with God, like Zacharias, didn't always have supernatural faith, like Zacharias. See, we don't need more evidence that God is faithful or some new revelation from God to come. God has given us all the revelation we need in His Word. What we need to do is we need to act on what God has already told us in His Word. By faith. Not by doubt and fear and unbelief. God doesn't work on our schedule. The prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah 55 that, my ways are not your ways, neither are my thoughts your thoughts, saith the Lord. For my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. God doesn't work on our schedule. And that frustrates us to death. But that doesn't mean that He's not working. Even though He doesn't work on our schedule, God still works. And in God's timing, we will see the fullness of His promises fulfilled in our life and the lives of others. We will see God's promises fulfilled. Remember in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, the Bible says, and when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth His Son. It was the timing, and it was the right time God waited for to send His Son into the world. The principle we take away here is this. Though we will never have perfect faith, we should always follow the faith we have, rather than listening to our doubts and our fears. See, Zacharias could have avoided all of that laryngitis for 9 months had he had the faith needed to bear the news. We can increase our faith can grow, but we need to follow the faith that we have in what we know. And God will bless us for it.